So I want to talk now about the form and structure a little bit, the language choices of the two poets a little bit about this idea of masculinity and male role models that are being explored in these poems. Starting with the form and structure, I've seen a lot of really interesting ideas that have been floated around in the past by students, even online. There's some revision guides and so on. I've seen this one about how follower, the arrangement of the lines look like the lines of the ploughed field. I don't hugely find that a compelling or a convincing argument. I think what you can do with that is suggest that in an essay, but use your hedging presentation. That means where you say, some people have suggested, or it is almost as if, which is a great way to start off a sentence if you're not totally convinced about the point you're going to make, but you don't want to leave it out because you don't get any points for not making points, okay? So, yes. Okay, fine. But in a way, lots of poems have straight lines of text across the page. I'm not convinced that all of them are supposed to look like a field. I think you have to really be trying quite hard to find that. What I think is much more interesting about the structure itself is the fact that we've got something that is essentially an A-B rhyme scheme, although there's a little bit of wobbling with some of the rhymes. We get a little bit of half rhyme, a little bit of slant rhyme. Strung and tongue, that's a good one. Plough and furrow, lines 1 and 3, not quite there. But as you go through, the general sense that it's A-B is there. Why is that important though? And I'd just like to identify rhyme schemes. It's because A-B might have connotations of being relatively simplistic and therefore associated with a viewpoint that is naive, simple, and therefore by implication sort of young, childish. The language is not childish. You wouldn't really get a kid saying this, but you do get the feeling that it is a grown man. We know this is looking back retrospectively from the point of a memory, right? But he is adopting the simplified view of the child who is seeing things in this certain way, because that is not a sophisticated rhyme scheme. That is a simple rhyme scheme, okay? Also the fact that we've got quite a neat arrangement that's quite simple in 6 stanzas of 4 lines each, which is another sort of simple thing. But structure-wise, this poem is structured so that we have a twist at the end, in the way that you might expect that in a sonnet where you have a volta. It's not a volta because a volta is just a feature of a sonnet, but there is a perspective shift at the end which actually throws everything that you've just read into a light which feels quite shadowy and feels quite murky. First time you read this poem, you may not remember how you felt, but I think the emotion that you get is that you suddenly go, oh, I was a nuisance, but today it is my father who keeps stumbling behind me and will not go away. The last line feels very final and it's quite rude, it's quite offensive, and suddenly you're not really sure how this relationship is working. You feel like the man, the father who has had this sense of awe and respect which has been ascribed to him, suddenly has that sort of taken away, and we get this sort of much worse image. Very, very, very subtly implied, but suddenly the image becomes very big in our heads of a stumbling old man who's bothering Seamus Heaney, or the persona's grown-up adult self who is now successful and doesn't want to have to look after this guy. The relationships between, old people and their older parents who are very, very, very old and frail, that relationship is very complex. It's a very difficult one to navigate, especially as your life goes on this kind of trajectory and you sort of overlap, right? So I think the poem actually ends up giving us a tone of sort of these complex emotions, this slight sense of dissatisfaction, and it's not altogether happy. And I'm comparing that directly with the structure of Climbing My Grandfather, which doesn't separate itself out into stanzas, but bombards us with one long fantasy voyage that's taken all in one. It almost feels like in one breath or one deep gulp. And I've seen people comment on this and say, well, this is a bit like The Shape of a Mountain. And again, okay, if you insist, but I don't know. I think it's more interesting to say that when you start climbing the mountain, because as I've already mentioned, I think this is about the process of climbing the mountain more than about the mountain itself. I think when you start this, you can't stop halfway through. You can't give up or give it a rest or have a little bit of a gap. It's a much more sort of exhilarating experience that you start and then you go all the way through to the end. And when you get to the end, this is the structure of the poem. We start at the feet. When we get to the top, there is a really, really, really warm explosion of positive imagery of these incredible ideas. The language there, I can only lie watching clouds and birds circle, feeling his heat, knowing the slow pulse of his good heart. I mean, that's a really lovely set of lines. Okay, there's just no other way about that. The warm visual imagery there of awe and respect and love, and you feel that glowing sense of love and compassion that just floods through there. And you know, it's set up for us through the sound devices. The sound device is not always the most important thing, but there is some nice sort of soft sibilants in there which make it quite nice. We've got the enjambment across the line so that we feel relaxed. We don't feel pinned down or restricted by some kind of, you know, pressure to conform to some kind of structure. So I think there's some interesting ideas there. The language that is chosen throughout both of the poems is really interesting, of course, throughout, and you'll know lots of this. It's just one thing that I want to compare in both. Both use, very interestingly, very specific vocabulary. In Follower, we get specific terms like the shafts and the furrow. What else do we have? Steel pointed sock, the head rig with a single pluck of reins, the sweating team turn round and back into the land. So what happens when you read that? Well, these are all words which are associated with the process of ploughing a field. Now, I don't know about you, but the first time I read this, I didn't know what a head rig was. Really sure what a steel pointed sock is, and I'm not absolutely sure what is the process of clicking your tongue to drive some horses. So something is going on here. Seamus is deliberately making verbal choices which make me, as a reader in 2020, read it and go, actually, I get what he's talking about, but I can't absolutely 100% access this memory because I don't know what these things are. And that is not an accident. That is actually deliberate. Seamus Heaney very deliberately, it's almost a political choice to say, I'm going to write this poem using the language of people who dug in the earth and knew what a head rig was, because that's what I want to talk about. And I don't want to have to explain myself to you because my language is living inside this memory of this particular moment that's relevant to this particular person. And so there is an effect here which can be described as an effect of alienation. An alienation effect. So I want you to be quite careful with this, everybody watching this, because there is a concept from German theatre called specifically the alienation effect, and it's not exactly this, but what I want you to understand is that it's a process of feeling like I, as the reader, and perhaps yourselves, you will agree with me, it's all your own personal interpretation, but I don't know if I can fully access my understanding of this man. But when Seamus Heaney, or the young boy, the persona uses that, the language is a signifier of their connection, because that specific language is a signifier of their shared understanding of the job and of the land. It's very important. So what does Andrew Waterhouse do in Climbing My Grandfather? There are rock climbing subject specific words. Okay, free in the sense that that's actually a specific vocabulary word. Overhang, you probably know what that is. Traverse, maybe a new one. It's a sideways climb. Okay, and it fits in here. When he's talking about things like glassy ridge, which is another specific way that you might refer to a particular part of a mountain if you do rock climbing. I was going to say for a job there, but it's not. I think that's another important thing here. It's a pastime. But if you are seriously interested in rock climbing, if you do get into rock climbing, I suggest you take it seriously. That's the best way to do it. So what's going on here? Is he trying to alienate me? I don't think so. I think this is more, in this case, about the persona creating the sense of identity. And rock climbing is an interesting one because rock climbing, the legend has it that rock climbing was invented by none other than Samuel Taylor Coleridge, one of the big six romantic poets who wandered off into the countryside and was the first person to decide to climb up a cliff for fun. But rock climbing actually has I believe this now, has a connotation of being a bit of a middle class pursuit. And feel free to kind of, send in your comments and emails if you disagree. But I think that as opposed to something like football, which is sort of traditionally a working class sport, I think rock climbing is quite a middle class pursuit because you need to have certain things and equipment and time and opportunity and places you can go. And I just suspect it is. And I think that there's a real difference here that Andrew Waterhouse is continuing to express the difference between himself, and the grandfather who has got all of the very vivid language which shows him to be this kind of salt of the earth working class person. Okay, that's it for today, because I think you listened to me for long enough now. So that's a set of ideas for comparing these two poems. I hope that's useful. Just email me any questions, and that's great. Take care of yourselves. Thanks, everyone.